Hi, welcome back to my channel. My name is Blake the Book Eater, and today we are going to talk about The Blade Itself by Joe Abercrombie, the first book in the first Law Trilogy. Now, you might have seen my thoughts about this in my March wrap-up, but if you haven't, here's a whole video talking about it. The first bit is going to be a non-spoilery, and then the second half is going to be very spoilery, so chapter times down below. So what is the first Law Trilogy? It is an adult fantasy grimdark book or trilogy written by Joe Abercrombie, and is the first in kind of a continuing series, because he has the first Law Trilogy, but then he has since published other books set in the world of First Law, so the story does not end with just the trilogy. I mean, I don't know. I've only read the first book, so who knows? So this book, I think, is really interesting because it's called grimdark, when I thought it was really funny as well. And I think this is, to me, how I want grimdark to kind of be, where it's not like so serious and so dark and so depressing that I can't have fun. Like, this book was so much fun to read. Well, I mean, I listened to it, but same difference. Actually, not same difference, because I think that listening to this was actually the better experience, because the narrator, Stephen Pacey, did so many voices. I kid you not, he had a different voice for every single character. Like, a character would pop up in one scene, and then boom, we would have a different voice. So it was literally like listening to a movie in my head, and it was so cool, and I loved it so much, and it really added, I think, to the experience of reading this book. While I wasn't able to like write down quotes or anything, there were lines that like really stuck out to me because Stephen Pacey like read them in a way that like I really like was emphasized on them. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but basically, like, this book was like so good, and I think I was able to really absorb it because I was listening to it. And yeah, so let's talk about it. So we follow three main characters. We have Logan Ninefingers, Sandang Glokta, and then also Jazal Luthar. And these characters were so interesting to follow. We do have some other viewpoint characters like the Dogman, Pharaoh, and Major West, but their viewpoints are kind of like here and there. They're not as prevalent as the other three, so I'm going to talk about the main three. So Logan Ninefingers is kind of where our book starts and our POV, and he was a fighter for King Bethod, who is now the self-proclaimed king in the north and is going to war with the Union. And so Logan is kind of on the run with his named men, and the named men are basically like, if all these people like know your name, you're like really dangerous. You're not just like some guy, you're like that guy. And so Logan is called the Bloody Nine, and he's very, very well known for his talents. And so Logan, at the start of the book, he gets separated from his crew of other named men like the Dogman and Three Trees, and so he is kind of called to meet up with the first of the Magi, this man named Baez. And so his plot was really interesting and intriguing. And then on the other side, in the Union, we have the other two perspectives. So we have Jazal Luthar, who is this really spoiled, shitty person who he's very sexist, very misogynistic, kind of an asshole. No, he's a total asshole. But so he's training to fight in this like fencing competition, and everybody is kind of like rooting for him. And so he's kind of balanced out by Major West. Major West is like in his point of view as well. And so when we get stuff from West's point of view, it kind of balances out how like other people see Jazal. And yeah, his storyline I think was the least interesting for me out of the three, but it did pay off at the end, and so I did really enjoy kind of his character as a whole. I thought he was a terrible person, and I hated being in his head, but like overall, it was like worth it. So it was just like, ugh, I hate being in this guy's head. But then, like, you know, it did pay off. And actually had some really good moments as well, so don't regret it. But then the last point of view was my favorite point of view, and he's probably one of my favorite characters in fiction in like a really long time, and that is Sandan Glokta. He is just so cool. I love him so much. He's a terrible person. Like pretty much all these characters are bad people or have done terrible things. But they're just like really fun to read about, and Glokta, I think, is the most fun to read about. So he was captured and tortured in the last war. Like, he was a prisoner of war, and so he was like horribly disfigured and crippled. And what does he do now? So he's an inquisitor where he questions and tortures people. And yes, this book is not for the faint of heart. There are many trigger warnings, which in my review on Storygraph, I list all the trigger warnings that I found in the book. Yeah, this is a very dark book, and it does go into detail at times, so if you're squeamish, be warned. But so his storyline, I think, was the most interesting for me, because Glokta is investigating this thing. I don't really want to spoil it, but yeah, his, I think, was the most fun, because it just felt so different from the rest of the book. It was like he was like on this little investigation, and I love investigations and the clues and seeing it come along. And that was mostly in the first half of the book, and I really, really love that. Not so much in the second half. We'll talk about that in the spoiler review. But yeah, definitely my favorite part of the book. So overall, I gave this book a 4-star out of 5. I really, really enjoyed it. There were lots of things that I loved about it. There are some quibbles I have with this book. And I loved how character-driven this book was, but at times it feels like there wasn't as much of a plot at times. Like sometimes there would be like really strong like plot moments, and there are sometimes there would just be like just character scene after character scene after character scene, which is fine. But overall, this book was a little aimless, and I wasn't exactly sure where it was going up until the end. And now I have kind of a good idea as to like where the trilogy is gonna go. But this is like, it's very much a setup type book, but it's a very, very enjoyable setup type book. But if you're expecting like a total like conclusion and like to be satisfied, I mean, you will be satisfied in some ways, but also you're going to need to read the rest. And also, I just want to mention, I know these characters are like terrible people, and because we're in their POVs, we do see things from their perspective. But one thing that showed up a lot that I just like was uncomfortable with was the descriptions of fat people in this book. It just kind of felt like very fat phobic to me at times, and I know that was because, or I want to believe it's because of the characters and not the author. I mean, I don't know Joe Abercrombie. Maybe his writing has gotten better. Because I think this book was published like, you know, like 12 years ago or something. Not saying that that excuses it, but I just hope that like from other characters' POVs, if we start getting other characters' POVs, we won't have these types of descriptions, because it made me very uncomfortable at times, just because it was just like really gross the way that like larger people were described. It just felt almost malicious, and like it did, like, and because the character, like the ones who were describing them, were malicious and assholes, I wasn't sure at times like if that was the character or the author. So I want to give the author the benefit of the doubt and just hope that it was the character. But I just wanted to mention that, like, that was something that it just, like, if it was like once or twice, I wouldn't think about it, but like it happened like a number of times where I was starting to be very uncomfortable anytime that was mentioned. So just a note before we talk about spoilers, sorry. So would I recommend this book? Yes, I absolutely would recommend this book. I had a really fun time reading it. I think overall I really enjoyed the plot. I really enjoyed the characters and the writing for the most part. And I'm really interested to see where this trilogy is going to go, because I do have like an idea of where it's headed, but like at the same time, I'm not entirely sure. So we'll see. Spoilers. This is gonna be very brief because I don't want to talk for too long about it. But there are some things I feel like I have to mention. So we'll just go character by character. Actually, no. First, we're going to talk about Major West because fuck that guy. Fuck him so much. I didn't want to say anything in my spoiler-free section because he is supposed to be this character that you're supposed to like and you're supposed to be on his side. And you're like, oh, he's balancing out Giselle. You know, Giselle is an asshole and Major West is like the good one. No, he is a fucking piece of shit and I hated him so much. Oh my God, at the end, because, you know, I think in that, Joe Abercrombie did a fantastic job writing him because you think he's the reasonable one. You think he is the good, the foil to Giselle. But he is an abusive, cowardice piece of shit. Like, and that scene was so hard to read. It was so hard to read when he was abusing Artie. Because I was listening to it, like I couldn't like skim, so I had to, it was so dark, and very effective. And I think her reaction to him was even worse because, you know, she endured all that abuse from her father because he left. And then after he died, she came and was hoping that, you know, her brother was going to be there for her. And then he turns around and does that shit to her. It was heartbreaking, and like I cried. It was a heavy scene, and I think just a testament to how good Joe Abercrombie is writing at these characters. Because then after that, you're like, okay, well, yeah, Giselle's a total asshole, but like he's starting to change, and like he's really full, and he actually cares about Artie. Like, you know, his bravado is very kind of toxic male, but like internally, because we're starting to see like his opinions and his feelings kind of change and start to evolve, and he starts to defend her even when she's not around, and like he's starting to get over the fact that she's a commoner and he's like a noble. Like he just wants to be with her, and you know, he's still a little shit, but I mean, you know, after that scene with West, you're like, she's much better off with fucking Giselle. And then with Logan, so Logan, you know, I loved Baez as a character. He scares me though, because like, I think we're conditioned to trust these wizard type figures that come up, you know, like Gandalf or Dumbledore, things like that. But with Baez, he just has this streak of like, you don't know what he's going to do, and like he seems good and you want to believe him. You're like, okay, yeah, like things are, you know, like he has his reasons for doing what he's doing, and he's a little sassy, so you're like, oh, okay. But then like he'll do some things and you're just like, I don't know if I can trust you. What is your end game? What is your end goal? Because like the fact that we don't know that, I think is so intriguing to me, because like, you know, they're going on this journey now to like the end of the world, basically, the edge of the world, basically. And it's just like, what do you want there? What are you doing? Why are you doing this? Because he's been around literally for thousands of years. So he's playing such a long game, and I have so many questions about Baez, and I love, like, Logan I think is a great foil to be with Baez, because he's just kind of like, I'm just here, I'm just doing what I'm doing. And his experience of the Union I think was really funny to me, because he's just so quote unquote uncivilized. And he's like, what the fuck is a fountain? Like, that was so funny to me. Like he has such a different life experience, because his, you know, it was about like survival. It was about like, like living the life and surviving against like Bethod and like other like warriors and things like that. And he comes to this capital and he's like, what is this? What is going on? I love that perspective. It was great. Also, he was like, he had some great moments, like where he pisses in the pot right after he encounters the Eater. That was funny. I was like, okay, yeah, like he doesn't trust toilets, so he's gonna go pee in a pot. Like, why not? And then we get to Glokta. Oh my god, what can I say about Glokta? So the first half of the book with the investigation, I think, was my favorite part of the book. Like when he was investigating the Mercers and all this type of stuff. It was just so good. I really enjoyed the investigation stuff. But then in the second half, when it kind of shifted and then Baez arrived and then he was kind of like investigating Baez, I didn't find that as interesting. Just because like we know that Baez is the first of the Magi, like we know. So because of that, Glokta's sections weren't as interesting to read. It was cool to see him kind of like start to come to the conclusion that like, oh, this is Baez. Like that was cool. But at the same time, I feel like a lot of that suspense was kind of removed because we know what Baez is. And so I feel like almost in another parallel world where this book was only Glokta, that section would have been more interesting because we wouldn't have had the Baez perspective or Logan's perspective on Baez. But because we did, that part of the book didn't interest me as much, although it was still good. Like I loved Glokta as a character, his commentary was great, but yeah, it wasn't as tense as I wanted it to be. Something that I do have to say though is I really love the scene at the end of the book where he reconciles with West. This is after West was revealed as an abusive asshole and terrible, and he comes crying to Glokta, and then we realize that West was trying to be there for Glokta in the past, but his mother turned West away because she looked down on him as a commoner. And so it's weird. Joe Abercrombie has built these characters who like you can sympathize with them on some areas, but then realize how terrible they are in others, but are still fascinated enough to read them and be interested in where their story is going. And so I think that really emphasizes how good of a storyteller Joe Abercrombie is. And so I'm just so fascinated to see where the next book is going to go, because I know that we have Glokta he's going to be investigating traitors in like a city and also like preparing it for war. We're going to have Logan, Giselle, Pharaoh, Baez, like all of them, on their journey. Also, speaking of Pharaoh, I loved her little sections. They were so removed in the sense, it almost reminded me of, I know, comparisons to Game of Thrones are annoying, but like it reminded me of like, Dany's storyline in Game of Thrones, because you had everybody in Westeros and then you had like Dany off doing her own thing. And so in this book it was like, everybody in like the Union, and then we had fucking Pharaoh off doing her own thing, and then she eventually like comes in, and I loved her interactions with them. I thought like she is a great character and I want to see more of her, and so I'm glad that they're all kind of like in the same unit now. And so yeah, I'm really intrigued as to where this trilogy is going to go, and I'm very excited to listen to it and then come and talk to you guys about it. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll talk to you next time.